Thank you for joining us on Time to Heal today. Today our guests are from the Boise Police Department. We're here to honor them and the work that they do to keep our community safe. And also to talk about the unique services that they offer, including how they work to keep themselves safe and healthy in a job to fulfill their unique stresses that they face. So today we have with us Nikki Flock, and she's going to share with us about her position here. She works for the Boise Police Department in the Victim Witness Unit.
Hi Pam, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate this.
Of course.
Let's start off. I'd like to ask you, tell us a little bit about the Victim Witness Unit. What is that?
So we're a unit comprised of 5 women who respond out on crisis calls. We respond out on homicides, suicides, child abuse, sexual abuse, rape, death notifications, anything where we have people who are victims. We respond out and try to help with crisis intervention, trying to help get people stabilized so that we're able to move forward and work through that process.
And how would they know about your unit?
Well, usually what happens is when patrol responds out on a case, if they identify victims that are needing to have further services, they will activate someone from our victim witness unit. And so we respond out and we work with them throughout the entirety of the process, the investigation and also the criminal justice piece.
So if they've been a victim, say, of rape or some other type of crime, and they don't want to go to the police department though right away, can they contact you?
You know, they can. Typically what we do though is, number one, we want to make sure that people in the community are safe and that they're healthy and have the resources that they need. If they decide that they do not want to report a rape, we can help them to identify resources in the community for mental health, but also for physical health.
Okay. I have another question for you. How long do you have to work with a victim?
You know, sometimes we work with victims for an hour. Sometimes we work with them for years. It depends.
For years?
For years, yes. It depends on the case. Certainly if a case becomes a criminal case where we work through the criminal justice process, we follow our victims through pre-trials and jury trials and sentencings, even onto the parole board and the parole hearings.
So are you acting like an advocate? Give me a little more explanation. What is the role? What is the act? I mean, they come in, they meet with you, or is it a counselor they're meeting with, or just?
You know, we're not trained counselors. We are more about the crisis intervention and getting them to a point where they're stabilized so that they can go get the counseling and get the other resources. Our role, though, is to help our victims through the entire process. And what I mean by that is helping them to talk with patrol, talk with detectives, move forward with the process, talk with prosecutors who are handling their cases, help them to tell detectives and prosecutors what they want. They may not want to move forward with a criminal case, and that's okay in some circumstances. But we want to make sure at the end of the day that they're safe and they have the resources that they need.
Oh, that is wonderful. I didn't even know all this. I have another question for you. What kind of training do the victim witness personnel need to have to do this position?
You know, typically when we're looking at hiring a victim witness coordinator, we're looking at them having at least a bachelor's degree in some sort of social sciences field, psychology, social work, something along those lines. But what is more important to me is that they understand crisis intervention. They understand when they get into a situation where there are a lot of emotions and in essence a life or death situation, that they're able to slow things down and help those victims to find safety for them physically as well as emotionally.
When you say safety, what do you mean by safety?
I mean a safe location.
Okay.
I mean that their person is safe, not only physically, but emotionally. We want to make sure that they are not in a situation where they're going to hurt themselves, okay, or hurt anybody else. We want to make sure that physically they're safe so that they aren't hurt.
That's wonderful. How do you keep yourself healthy You know, because as a counselor myself,
Mhm.
I've had clients that have shared a lot of painful things with me, and I try not to get too enmeshed with that because it's very hard, you know,
Absolutely.
to know what they're going through. So what do you do to keep yourself healthy? And
You know, I think we've got a unit of 5 victim witness coordinators. We all have a trauma bond with each other. You know, certainly we rely on each other, and we come back to the office and we talk about what's happened, and we kind of process through that as a level of camaraderie. I have a routine that I do at the end of my day. When I take my badge off, at the end of the day, my rule is I'm not thinking about work. I'm focusing on what I need to do at home with my kids and my husband. And it's a separate life as much as I can make it. Certainly there are those times when I may have a really tough case that intrudes on my personal life. And when that time comes, I recognize it, I identify it, and if I need to, I seek out my own counseling. I take a break from work. I do those things that take care of me so that I can take care of others.
you know, I'd heard that in my own recovery. My
Mhm.
sponsor had said, "Give to the job what belongs to the job,
Uh-huh.
and give to the family what belongs to the family."
Absolutely.
But that it takes a little while to learn how to do that.
It does.
But it's important.
Yeah.
How did you get started in this type of work? What was your draw to be involved helping people in this way?
But you know, I feel strongly that we need to be helping people. We've got to be a healthy community. I started my career as a preschool teacher.
Preschool.
And, you know, if we don't have healthy families and healthy kids, things seem to not go so well for the rest of the community. And as I worked through that career, I went into social work and wanted to get into the helping profession more. I wanted to try to do work that maybe is preventative, meaning helping people and stopping things from happening. And I think as a victim witness coordinator, although I'm reactionary in that I'm activated once something has happened, part of my goal as a victim witness coordinator is to help victims to not be re-victimized and to work through that process.
Do you know how this unit actually got started? Who came up with this idea?
Well, it actually started probably 20 plus years ago, and it's an Idaho statute that requires that victims of crime have certain rights throughout the criminal justice process. So that is part of where we come from. But I think certainly there is a whole piece to victimization that happens before you get to the criminal justice process. And a lot of our criminal cases don't necessarily get prosecuted, but we still have victims who need help and who need resources to get healthy.
You know, I mentioned to you earlier that we had done a show on men that have been victimized by women.
Uh-huh.
And do you see that? Do you have men coming in that are needing your services?
Oh, absolutely.
You do?
Yeah, we see men that are victims of domestic violence, and we see women that are victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence doesn't pick and choose a socioeconomic status or a certain address or location. It's across the board.
And all the cases you see as far as victims, what would be the majority of homicide, domestic violence?
You know, within our unit, we each have a specialty that kind of has drawn us. In my particular instance, I work a lot of cases that involve children. Children of sexual abuse, children of physical abuse and neglect. And that's because part of my work before was in child protection, so I understand the system. We have other victim witness coordinators who work with the elderly and the vulnerable population. We have a victim witness coordinator who specializes in human trafficking and working with those victims. We have a victim who works with the LGBT community and is really a voice for them as well. So we have different areas of specialty. I think if you're asking what is our main focus, I think we see a lot of domestic violence, but along with that domestic violence, we see how that reaches the whole family, and we see the child abuse that comes from that as well.
It's wonderful to know that each, the crime, you know, the child abuse or domestic, that you have a unit for each one, so they specialize and they know right where the resources are in the community. Because I'd had cases that I had to figure out different things they needed for everything. That's wonderful.
Well, not only
Yeah.
that, but we also, there's a victim witness unit within the prosecutor's office
Oh.
and within the sheriff's department. And so we meet on a monthly basis and we share resources. We try to come up with better ways to handle things, system improvements, and advocating for our victims.
In the community, what have you found to be the most frustrating that's not available for these victims?
I think sometimes we struggle with having enough shelter for victims.
Homeless shelters?
Not necessarily homeless shelters, but safe shelters. Sometimes we have an influx of domestic violence and we maybe don't have enough beds for those families and those victims. And so that's a struggle. We have a struggle with working and identifying enough resources for human trafficking victims and understanding the victimology in those cases.
If you were, speaking of the community right now, what's the need? What can they do to help you?
Well, I think always identifying further resources. I think in some cases we have families who are dealing with domestic violence and victims who need to go to shelters, but they don't want to go to the shelter because it means that maybe their dog or their cat has to go to the pound. And while some of us may think it's very simple to take care of that pet is part of their family.
Yes.
And so, in essence, we need shelters for animals.
So could they contact you and say, hey, I'll be a foster parent for an animal?
That would be a possibility, certainly. I know that sometimes we outreach to the churches to try to identify whether or not they could help with animals or with alternate resources that people do need.
I was a foster parent for dogs once.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, we're coming here to a close, that you would like to share to the community about your unit?
Certainly, I think it is important for everybody to understand if you're a victim of crime, please don't be afraid to come in and report. We're here to help, and even if you don't want to move forward with the criminal justice process, we can help to identify resources in the community that potentially can help you. The idea is to get the resources to get back on your feet and to be a productive member of society.
Absolutely. Oh, what a blessing that you came.
Thank you
I really
very much.
appreciate this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And we'll be right back with another guest from the Boise Police Department.
323 to 584. 25. Adam Young, 1955. Okay. 331 we have 482 coming out there for the hit and run. You might wait for it.
Welcome back to Time to Heal. We're back here with another guest from the Boise Police Department.
My name is Ron Weiniger, and I'm a captain with the Police Department in the Community Outreach Division.
Thank you for coming here today to share with us about your department. Can you start off by telling us what's so unique about your unit, your department?
Well, our division, the Community Outreach Division, encompasses several different units within the department, and it basically deals with a lot of the units that don't fall into the traditional policing role, if you will. We have everything from our mountain bike patrol officers to our motorcycle officers, neighborhood contact officers, the community policing aspect of our department. Boise State University, we provide police services for the campus, and those types of things all fall within the Community Outreach Division.
And the other part of your unit, you said you have a peer support?
Well, actually, yes. I'm one of the coordinators of our peer support team, which is department-wide, but we have a peer support team that provides services to officers regardless of their position or their assignment within the department.
Just a personal question. What motivated you to even become a police officer? Was this a little boy, or?
I think, like most people who are drawn to this line of work, most people who enter this job have a desire to help, a desire to see justice done and fairness in things, but really a desire to help other people and make our community a better place to live. And so definitely that was something that that drove me to want to become a police officer. I certainly admired those that I saw in the community, police officers. I remember I grew up in Oregon. An Oregon State Trooper came to my school when I was very young, and I just looked at him in awe and thought, that's really cool. And I have a brother, an older brother, who was a police officer as well, and so certainly was drawn a little bit by that.
Oh, that is wonderful. I worked as a police dispatcher once. I wanted to be a police officer too, but I had a dream. I couldn't pull the gun, so I had to change my mind on that. I have another question for you. In your line of work, you know, and have the stress that you go through, how do you keep from taking that home? What happens, I mean, once you get off work? What do you do?
That's a great question, and I think every officer handles it a little bit differently. Everybody has their own way of dealing with stress. I guess we all do, regardless of our occupations. There's stress in every job that I can think of. I can't think of a stress-free job out there. But there are some unique stresses in law enforcement that most people don't have to deal with. Obviously, the thought at any given time that someone may intend to harm or kill you. That's not something that goes along with most occupations.
Yeah.
And the other things is that you're dealing with people in crisis on a regular basis. As our chief often says, we're dealing with people when they're the maddest, the saddest, and the baddest.
All the emotions.
Exactly. So people don't generally have a party and remember to call the local police officer and invite them to it. It's more when you're in a domestic violence situation, when there's a crisis going on in your life, whatever the case may be, emotions are running high, and officers are called to try and put some order to the chaos and solve some problems. So that can be a stressful thing that ordinarily, I guess, you don't encounter in everyday life or in most other jobs. So officers have to learn to deal with that stress, and when they go off shift, when they go home, we have officers working around the clock and all days of the year, regardless of whether it's a weekend or a night or a holiday, we have officers on, and so they have to be able to kind of unplug and unwind and reset themselves to the point where they're ready to go out and tackle it all again the next day or the next night. So we encourage certainly good hobbies, things to do to take your mind off from work and the things that you deal with. Physical exercise, diet's important, all of those things that they apply to everybody, but especially to the officers who deal with these kind of unique stressors in their lives.
What about the officers that we know some of them do have some alcohol problems because they've used alcohol?
Sure. I think like anybody else, police officers are susceptible to all of the same things that other people are, and that includes alcohol and drug issues. Certainly there are those who turn to that as a way to relieve stress, and certainly that's not a healthy way to go, and it's not something we encourage. In fact, it can definitely have a bigger effect maybe on us than some other jobs out there. And so we have a peer support team that we created several years ago in an effort to help officers learn how to manage stress and better deal with those things. And we also recognize that there are situations where officers have gotten involved with substance abuse, whether it be prescription medications or alcohol. Hopefully we don't have a lot of illegal drugs going on. I certainly haven't encountered that, but those things are out there, and they are within our department and probably within every department out there. And so we created a peer support team to deal with that as well as many other issues related to stress and stress management.
You know, I'm so glad to hear that, because it always felt like it was unfair just because they're a police officer, and if they do have a substance abuse problem, they're either are they fired or looked down on, and it didn't ever feel like it was appropriate. They need help too.
Sure.
And to know that that's what's happening in your department, if they do reach out, they've got you to turn to.
Yes, and you look around in the country and even locally in the news, there are times when police officers' lives are in crisis as well.
Yes.
And sometimes, unfortunately, the choices that we all make end up with pretty serious and severe consequences. We have officers who have lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods and their careers based on the choices they've made. But we believe that our peer support team has been very effective and has given us a way to help officers who need it, who want it, and who turn to us for help. some of those stresses that we encounter are a little bit unique, like I said before, and if they are experiencing those stresses that are unique, sometimes there's not really anybody that they can share that with or contact that understands it. Much like the military personnel coming home from overseas who have served in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places in the world where they have seen and experienced some horrific things. I don't want to compare our service to that because they're very different. But much the way those folks come home, they find a population of people back here at home that don't necessarily understand and don't know what they've been through. And so it's hard for them. And the best thing they found for those veterans coming back is to be able to connect with other veterans who have been there and who understand those stresses. We find the same thing in law enforcement. Sometimes an officer just needs to talk to another person who's been there and experienced that, the types of things that they have experienced, the domestic violence, the child abuse, the internet crimes against children, the child pornography, a lot of different things that we encounter, including violence and quite often death, tragic car crashes, and violent crimes that we get exposed to. And we see things that I think human nature is not meant to see. And so there are just opportunities where we can rely on each other. We can talk to a peer who's been there and done that. And it seems to help. And in many cases, I think it's saved a career or enabled an officer to turn to some more healthy choices to deal with stress than maybe the ones we've been talking about, alcohol and drug abuse.
And you know, listen to the news, like you said, and just, I'm not an officer, I'm not seeing it, just hearing it. It's so hard on my heart sometimes. You can imagine what you go through. You know, you got to see it, hear about it all the time. Can't get a break from that.
Sure, and you know, the officers that are out there every day doing the work and responding to those calls for service, they have a unique kind of stress in their lives. And the stresses change a little bit as you go through the administrative ladder, if you will, working as a lieutenant and now as a captain in the police department. I guess our stress sometimes comes from seeing the stress that our officers go through and some of the troubles that they have in their careers and in their lives. And so my stress today is a little different than it was years ago when I was on the street as an officer. But I worry about the officers and their well-being and their families and the toll that the job takes on them from the intense scrutiny that's placed upon them, both from members of the public as well as members of the department. You know, we're always reviewing and evaluating an officer's performance, just like people in the community are. The television and movies, there are more movies and more television shows made about police work than probably any other topic in the world, and so we have a population who consumes those television shows and those movies, and they suddenly become experts on what it's all about to be a police officer. Everybody knows how to do the job. Unfortunately, most of those things that we've had over the years are not really based in reality, and so we get an unfair or an unreal sense of what it is to be a police officer. And so that intense scrutiny sometimes just adds to the stress officers experience.
Do you know you're very special? You have a heart that a lot of people don't have. I mean, you not only are wanting to help people, you might die doing it. I mean, you think about that. That's just amazing. You're like a different brand of special people. Very special. Takes a special heart.
And I think by and large, when you look at the officers that work in this department and departments all across the country, we all got into this for a reason. And as we started out saying what that reason is, it's generally to help people, to make the community a better place to live in. Police officers are the same as you and me. They're the same as school teachers and firefighters and doctors and lawyers and laborers and people who work in whatever profession they choose. We all have families. Our kids all go to the same schools. We all shop in the same grocery stores. We just have lives, and that's one thing I would like everybody, I guess, out there to know, is that you have stresses in your life just like we have stresses in ours, and we all face many of the same challenges. But we just have a strong sense of duty to try and preserve our community to be a good place to live, a good place to raise children, a good place to recreate and work and just do all the things that we do.
But I can't help but put you in a different class. I think you're still very special. As a counselor, we're held up to a certain standard that we have all the answers. You know? So if they know that we're going to a therapist, they go, why? You know, So it's the same, you know, I'm hoping they'll start realizing that, yeah, just because you're a police officer doesn't mean that you're not human.
Right.
So if you were sitting here talking to another officer that's listening today, that maybe is struggling with some things that he hasn't had a chance to talk to you because he lives in another state or country,
Sure.
what would you suggest to him?
Just that, you know, there's no shame in getting help for issues that you may be facing in your life. If you fall down and break your leg, I don't think anybody's embarrassed or ashamed to go to the doctor and get that leg set and get treatment and medical attention. But when we see things and experience things that damage our psyche, if you will, or just add stress in our lives, there is a stigma there, or has been for many, many years, that you have to be tough, you have to suck it up, and you just have to deal with it and move on. And I would just say that it's okay to seek help if you need it. Find somebody to talk to. Even if you don't want to go to a professional and talk to somebody in a therapeutic session or a counseling session, find somebody who's been where you are and unload on them if you need to, and lean on them. I think the peer support team is just a formalized program of what we do already anyway, and that's share with each other the stuff that bothers us. So.
I've heard that in my own recovery, we're as sick as our secrets.
Mm.
And we don't have to do this alone. That's what you're saying.
You bet.
Because you can't really.
Right. I see people who try, and after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, I don't know very many that can actually make it through that entire career without ever having to lean on somebody in a tough time.
And
We
actually,
support each other.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We have each other.
Mhm.
We don't have to do this by ourselves. Is there anything, we're just about done here, that you would like to share or say about your department that's important that maybe we missed?
Just that I'm honored to work here at the Boise Police Department and in the Treasure Valley in general. We have a very professional organization. We have great training. We have great support from our community. By and large, you will always have detractors. You will always have people who have had a negative interaction. And, we're not perfect. We don't do everything perfect all the time. I'm sure there have been situations that have gone badly. And there are those who have a very dim view of law enforcement, and I understand that. But by and large, I'm thankful to work here in a community where we enjoy large community support. By and large, most of the people in our community do respect the work that we do. They're thankful for it. We get letters of expression of thanks from people all the time in our department for the interactions that they've had with officers. And by and large, day to day, officers are out there doing their best to help and to calm situations and bring order to some of the chaos that creeps into, I guess, everybody's life at one point or another.
Well, thank you very much for coming on today. And if you see him in the community, stop and give him a donut, or do you want pizza?
Well, at least just wave and use all your fingers. That's all
Okay.
we ask.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today at Time to Heal. We are so grateful that we have this department here helping us in the community, and I don't want to forget to say something to the families. Thank you so much, because we know what you go through to let your family member go out there and you may not have them come back home, and we want to thank you for that and honor you too. And just know that we're on your side and we support you. And don't give up, because your miracle's on its way.